Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the February 10th edition of the Intuit Developer Friday Morning Hangout. I'm your host, David Leary. I'm the Intuit Small Business Ecosystem Evangelist. You can find me at David Leary. Excuse me. Today we have a special guest, Joe Preston. He's from the Design System and Engineering team at Intuit. He's going to do an encore presentation of his design presentation that he gave at QBconnect last October. Before we jump into that, I just want to cover a couple of things to let you guys know about. One thing is we're very announced this, I think, this week, 100,000 app showdown, 100,000 app showdown. This than it was last year. So last year we only took apps that were on the platform from January 1st of 2016 to August 15th, 2017. Now we're expanding it, so we're not going to let any apps miss. So the day an app wasn't eligible for the contest last time, so it would be August 16th all the way until the current app, the closing date, which is August 15th. So a full year of apps can get on, not just ones that happen to manage to hit that window. So just stay tuned for this. If you launched your app on apps.com, you are eligible for this. You'll have to go to this site and just sign up. Obviously, with lawyers and when you're giving out $100,000, there's some extra things that have to occur. So once you launch on apps.com, you can come here and say, yes, I want to be in the contest, and we'll get you in the contest. And again, just like before, we're going to have more details coming out on this. We'll bring the finalists to San Jose. You'll be able to pitch at QBconnect in front of the accountants and everybody else. So it should be a lot of fun again, and hopefully you guys jump on this if you haven't already. It's smallbizappshowdown.com. Another thing we have coming up for those of you that are in London, we do have the Small Business Hackathon in London, the 4th and 5th of March 2017. At this, we're going to be giving away £5,000. You can build just any small business solution as long as it helps a small business. We are actually partnering with some other partners there, as you can see on the left. So you can build on Amazon Alexa, Nextmobile, or Estimote, Square. So definitely please attend that. And another event is also in the UK, which is actually, we have QBconnect in the UK happening the 6th and 7th of March at the Tobacco Dock. The 6th day and the 7th is the day for everybody else. I recommend as a developer, if you're in the UK region, EU region, make the trip, meet some accountants. An accountant can really make and break your app. So you could have your app. You could have one subscriber to your app, might be the accountant, or maybe they put on one business owner on their app. But then 6 months later, 8 months later, maybe sometimes it takes a year to 18 months later, but eventually they roll you out to all their clients. So you instantly get 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 subscriptions to your app. So it's really, really important to come meet accountants, nurture those relationships for the long-term sales for your app. And then another thing to remember is we are doing Hangouts in the future. So we still have Hangouts every week. Ones for some of the encore presentations from QBconnect San Jose. And we're also doing Hangouts. I'm actually doing a special UK edition of Hangouts. So I'm actually doing 2 a day for the next 4 weeks. And they will be covering the API partners that are coming on the platform. So if you want to if you're in the and go to an extra Hangout, you can. If not, I will get them linked to on YouTube. But you can find all the Hangouts here at the hub page, the events page. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to kill my sharing, and I'm going to switch over to Preston. Yeah. Stop sharing. And Joe, you could probably go off of mute and go ahead and start sharing if you'd like.
All right. Let me share my
You're
screen.
still mute. Okay, I can hear you. I can see you. We're getting somewhere. Nice.
Great.
And your presentation is loading, and I can see your presentation. I think we're good. I can see everything. Joe, thank you for doing this. I'm glad to have you on the Hangout. Welcome, and I'll let you take over.
Awesome. Thanks, David. So yeah, I'm honored to be here and happy to walk you guys through just some basics. Call it a 101 course for designing for mobile. So first, some background on myself. So I've been with Intuit for a little over a year now, and I manage on the SBG side, the design system and the design engineering team. Before that, I had a UX design agency. We were enterprise focused in Silicon Valley area, and I still much to the demise of my wife's wanting me to do it, run a meetup group on my nights and weekends about software design. And I'm most importantly, I'm a dad with two daughters. So what are we going to go over today? So we're going to talk about why are we talking about designing for mobile, although that should be short because it should be fairly obvious, I think, to everyone. We're going to go over some fundamentals. We're going to go over the grid, the atomic and responsive grids. We're going to go over some best practices, some techniques you can use when you're designing for mobile. And then if you forgot all of that, I'll give you my 3 takeaways that hopefully you will remember. So why are we here talking about designing for mobile? Well, because mobile's everywhere. You could be in almost any public place and see a myriad of folks staring at their phones. And just to give you some stats to back that up here, right now, actually, if you want to talk about e-commerce sales, which is really a large portion of retail nowadays, 30% of all e-commerce is actually done by people transacting on their mobile devices. And then these stats are even more staggering. And this, I gave this presentation at QuickBooks Connect, so these numbers might even be larger now. But effectively, if you take into account that 1.7 total monthly active users on Facebook each month, and that's really across all devices. Out of that number, 1.57 billion mobile active monthly users are on mobile devices. And then if you take that stat, also half of those are only using mobile device to log into Facebook. And I forget, when I crunched the number of the world's population, that was something like 1/8 of the world's population. So those, you see those staggering numbers in terms of mobile device usage, and yet we still have examples of folks like our brothers and sisters over at Google that still don't have mobile friendly sites. You can still go around the internet and find really bad examples such as this. This site is best viewed on a desktop or tablet device, doesn't work on their phone. Even with companies that are traditionally very progressive with, design, or early adopters such as Volkswagen, they still build stuff that doesn't work on phones. And we're responsible for it too. So this is our Intuit online payroll app, and as you can see, it's not the most pleasant mobile experience, although it is, it does work on a mobile device. So with that as some sort of foundational stats, we're going to go into some fundamentals here about how you could design for a mobile device. And I pulled out some videos because some of these concepts I'm going to go through here are really hard to visually illustrate in a static format. So these dynamic formats of a video really help the concepts sink in. So when people say desktop first versus mobile first, so that's basically, if you're designing, what perspective are you going to start to make design solutions from? Will that be from a larger format device such as desktop? Also, the actual interaction paradigms of keyboard and using a mouse or a touchpad being your primary thought in terms of user input? Or on the other side of it, are you going to start with a touch interaction first and a small screen or form factor first? So that's really just philosophically different points of view in terms of how people will start their designs. And to be honest, not every product or experience that we use should be thought about as mobile first, because you really have to look at how customers are currently using your product, or even try to anticipate how they will. And the reality is a lot of people will still use desktop computers. Another concept that it's very related to what we just talked about, desktop first versus mobile first, is you could think about the concept of progressive enhancement or graceful degradation. So progressive enhancement definitely being akin to mobile first, where you start with very simple amounts of interactions. Also, you might strip out even information that's presented. You might strip out navigation, and then as your screen expands to larger formats, you can enhance the information, enhance the navigation, enhance the amount of affordances or interactions that you have. And graceful degradation is just the exact opposite. So actually removing and simplifying elements as the screen or the form factor gets smaller. This is probably the most related to mobile design, the most common set of terms that you hear, especially when it comes to mobile web design, which is what does responsive versus adaptive mean? Well, in general, I'm going to sort of paraphrase and sum it up that responsive, you're generally taking um, information that's presented or an experience that's presented, and you're shrinking it and you're possibly repositioning it a little for different size devices. Adaptive, however, is where you can actually make a fundamental shift in how the information is presented. So, for instance, you may have a button used at a larger format, and at a smaller format, it may appear as a link. You may have another UI control that's common in this is you may use a radio button for binary selection on a larger format screen, and that may appear as an on-off switch for binary selection on the smaller screen. So that sort of juxtaposition of presentation is really what defines an adaptive solution to design. Another related concept specifically to most oftenly responsive design, but it is also used for adaptive, is that the underlying mechanics of when you're telling the system to make a change revolves around what we call breakpoints. So breakpoints we'll go into a lot more in depth, but in general, you could think of them as units or ranges of pixels, or they don't necessarily actually have to be pixels. They could be other forms of measurement. But within those ranges, you define that something is going to change or something is going to happen. So we'll go a lot more in depth about that specific topic later. And then another concept that really is not new to designing for mobile, and this has been around since the beginning really of web design, but it's still very relevant, is the idea of fixed versus fluid. So just the idea that something will expand if given whatever the space of the container that it's given, that would be fluid. And then something that will always remain the same size no matter what the container it's given, and that would be fixed. And then this is also just a general design concept here, but I think technology really has afforded us the ability to make some improvements here. And then especially with our super high fidelity monitors that we have on all of our devices, you see a trend for people moving away from what you see on the right here, images or pixel-based, or you might hear them called raster-based images, to vector-based, which you see on the left. And the difference really is you can either define an image as really a set of pixels that are given a color. However, the problem there is when you scale it up or down, you're effectively trying to scale that pixel to multiple pixels. So you get these artifacts on the edges, or it just doesn't look very clean or nice. Whereas on the left with a vector image, it's really just a mathematical equation that defines the image. And the device itself is actually creating the image on the fly from the math. And so you can scale it up or down to any size without any loss of fidelity. All right, so now we're going to go into some best practices, just some things to consider if you're designing for a mobile app or a mobile website. These are some things not to do. I'm going to start off with, which is don't squish every single pixel with a piece of content or information or a color. And this is just a best practice for design in general. But I think as the screen sizes have shrunk and you really have less pixels to work with, you even have to be very restrictive with the amount of content that you present. When you're writing a description of something or a call to action, you have to be very succinct and very to the point. And same with just design interactions. You have to be very, very clear and upfront. So related to that are the actual interactions that you choose. So this is our Go Payment app, and a lot of the interactions in it are very brief, and they're very bold. So what I mean by that is because the user might be in an environment where you're slightly distracted, but they're sort of glancing at their phone, whatever interactions happen on there have to overcome that distraction. And so they really have to be bold. You know, some interactions on a mobile device make use of things like vibration and sounds to help overcome sort of the distraction. Another common thing used, not just in mobile design, it's also used quite a bit actually in any device, you know, even television design or Internet of Things design. If you look at the user interface, motion is being used a lot more for purpose. So long gone are the flash banner ads with the flashing red sirens, although I still get those every now and again. And enter this new world where motion can be used to reinforce purpose. It can be used to reinforce interaction. It can be used to reinforce navigation. And it adds sort of that little element of delight, or some people call it magic, or to me, it's really kind of a human element. It's really like a natural element being applied in the digital world. And then another thing to keep in mind for fundamentals is that when we're talking about touch or someone using their fingers to interact, you're not just talking about a smartphone anymore. So most of our laptops and even some of our desktops now also use touch, or at least, you know, a combination of touch and keyboard input. So you know, you don't, when you're thinking about, you know, should I design for touch, or even should I design for a set of finger gestures, you're not just talking about a small screen anymore. You're talking about all forms of computers now are using touch. And this is true of even in, you know, like automobiles or all sorts of devices. Anything with a screen is moving towards a world where you can touch it to interact with it. Excuse me. Another thing to keep in mind when you're designing for mobile is just the amount of sensors available and processors available on a phone are quite different from you know, some laptops, especially given the sense that you're on the go with it. You've got things like camera, GPS, fingerprint identification. So you have a lot of capabilities, and with that, a lot of possibilities that you don't have with a computer, just by means of the size of it. And my most favorite capability is starting a fire. If you're out camping, just throw your Samsung Galaxy, and there you go. So another thing to keep in mind for fundamentals, this is kind of similar to what we talked about, brief and bold interactions. But basically, it's the idea that on a phone, um, data input is a pain. Um, although we do have these device capabilities that can circumvent some of the traditional ways to input data, if you're having someone fill out a form with a keyboard, with the device keyboard, you really want to think about, is there ways we can pre-populate information? Is there ways we can pull that information from another app or from the operating system itself? Or do we really even need that information to get this person through onto what they're trying to accomplish? So when it comes to form input or data input, the simpler the better, less is more, all that type of stuff. And then the other interesting fundamental is that people aren't using their mobile devices in a vacuum. They're often possibly sitting in front of their TV. They're often sitting in front of their computer. They might be in their car where there's even another screen. So, in some contexts, the mobile device is actually just one screen of many in an environment full of screens. And you even see some apps that are taking advantage of this. So I bring up YouTube as a great example where the YouTube app on the mobile device has a feature where it can turn into a remote control if it sees other YouTube apps on other screens around it via Wi-Fi. And they've really thought about how is the phone really a second screen experience to, the third screen of the TV, or even a whole variety of other scenarios. Some of media players in general are moving towards this world. And then to sum up, I think it's really important, even not considering mobile device design, but just in general, especially as it relates to your brand, about keeping the experience cohesive across devices. Some would say that the customer experience is your brand. So if you're not cohesive, if you're not consistent, and I'm putting this up as an example of, putting our dirty laundry as Intuit on the table, that even we, with our myriad of apps, are not as consistent or cohesive as we should be. And actually, part of the team, one of the teams I manage, this is our job, is to try to create this sense of cohesion. So you can see we have a long way to go there. All right, let's dive into the grid. And specifically how it applies to designing for mobile. So the grid is it's been around for probably a little over a decade now, but there's two types of grids. But in effect, what we're talking about is it's a set of constructs and a set of logic that defines the relationships between all of the elements on the screen. So all the elements being the typeface sizes, the size of a button, the position of the button, anything you could think about in terms of the space is what we're going to talk about with the grid, space and size. So one of the concepts related to the grid is what is called an atomic grid. This is really you can hear it called the baseline grid. So what this is it's an abstraction of a unit of measure of a screen. And the atomic grid is the smallest unit of measure. And people can define it in different ways at different companies or in different instances. At Intuit specifically, our smallest unit of measure of a screen is 4 pixels. So we would call that our atomic unit, or you could call it your baseline unit. And we use that unit of measure to multiply or divide or apply to any of the elements you see on the screen, whether that's the size of them or the space of them. So um, here I've got an example. When we were defining this is actually at an Intuit wide level. We were exploring what the options are, what the common atomic units are. 4 and 8 are definitely the most common. We saw some companies using 5. The reason why we didn't want to use 5 is because when you look at the myriad of screen sizes out there, most of them are divisible by 4. And so usually you'll have, um, usually if you have an element that's divisible by 4, the chances are it will actually line up perfectly to a pixel on the screen. If we were to choose a unit such as 5 pixels, what we might have is, for some screen sizes, um, the actual object, the shape, the font, whatever it is, won't line up perfectly to a pixel. So what the screen will do is it will try to make up that difference by rendering a half pixel, or you might see this called anti-aliasing. And sometimes that can appear as blurry, or it can appear as not as sharp of an edge, because what it's trying to do is figure out the difference between these neighboring pixels. So we chose 4 because for most screen sizes, they're all in increments of 4. So now we're going to get into the second type of a grid, which is what you'll hear called the responsive grid. You might also hear it be called the column grid. So this is really used to control what we talked about earlier, which is how the elements on the screen behave, change, respond, or adapt given the screen size that they have, or the breakpoint that they have, which we talked about earlier. Let me actually. So we use actually a 12 column grid. So these are actually 12 columns that run the horizontal span of the screen, no matter what the size of the screen is. And then you're typically aligning elements to, if not one column, it could be groups of multiple columns, and you could align them left, centered, right. You can also take groups of elements. We'll go into that later. At Intuit, what we have for our breakpoints are, we've got extra small, which is essentially 0 to 479 pixels. You have small, which is 480 to 767, so on and so forth. So really, what these breakpoints define is that at the moment that the screen hits 768, for example, width, you can trigger a change. So you can trigger something to move, something to resize, something to appear, something to disappear. Really, the options, something to animate in. It's really kind of endless what your options are. But you can think of these really as triggers. And then we actually, one of the things we don't often consider, or is the opposite of small and mobile device screens, which is just that our screens are also getting much larger. So we're doing a lot of work, especially this year, into thinking about defining much larger breakpoints for folks. So in these 12 columns, or different companies define the amount of columns they use on a case-by-case basis. What you're typically working with is groups of columns. So you're not typically aligning things to each individual column, although you do have that flexibility. You're typically using groups of 2, 3, 4 columns at a time, and you're aligning an element to that. And this is how most responsive frameworks work out of the box. So some things to consider when you're designing for the grid, and this is one of the most common mistakes I see designers that don't have experience designing for responsive do, is they often think that, if you took a horizontal navigation as an example, they often think that, well, I need to break up every single element of that navigation, such as each navigational element and then each divider. And I actually need to align those each to, in this case, a column or a two column. But what that would create is, that would create for the system, as these columns collapse, it would have to find a place for each of these to go. And so you might lose alignment, you might lose positioning, and it would be really tough to manage. So what you actually want to do is you want to think of the element as a group. So you want the whole horizontal tabs to respond as one unit. Therefore, you need to take the entire, in this case, it would be probably a div, and you would align the div to, let's say, one particular column. You could also align it to a group of columns. But you wouldn't want to break apart each sort of sub-div and align those each to a set of columns, because you actually want these to act as one unit. So when you're designing, you want to think of the units and the groups of units that you want to respond or adapt, and how those groupings should respond or adapt. And that's how you would align them to a column or group of columns. Another related concept is reordering. So we'll go through some good basic examples of responsive and adaptive. But one of the other things to consider, in addition to grouping, is reordering. So here you can see on the left, with a desktop screen size, I have the ability to put elements side by side, and I have also vertically stacked elements. And then as the screen gets smaller, obviously you don't have room to put things side by side. So a common solution is to vertically stack things. But you don't have to vertically stack things. You have control over the order of the stack. So you don't necessarily have to follow the same vertical order that you did in desktop. You really have complete control over restructuring the order on the smaller breakpoint. You probably would want some things to be consistent, such as your header and your footer. But aside from that, you don't have to have the navigation appear below the header. You could reposition the nav, and you could even change the display of it. Another area that we're moving towards, especially on our marketing pages, and we're just starting this in our products, is the idea of vertical grid spacing. So this is the idea of taking your atomic units and actually making other groupings of them that are also based on that atomic unit, and applying these sort of spacing units. Again, you could think of them as small, medium, and large, and then assigning them to all of the elements on the screen vertically, so that you can really have a nice vertical rhythm to all the elements. And you can apply it not just the spacing between the elements, such as padding and margin. You can apply vertical spacing also to things like line height when it comes to text. So one of the things we're working on is how we can basically retain these units while allowing sort of these ratios of, let's say, type scale, and setting an atomic unit, running it through a set of ratios for all of your type scale elements, and then calculating them out so they map to an actual one of these small, medium, large, extra large spacing units. So that way we can maintain a nice vertical rhythm while still adhering to what we've defined as our vertical grid. And this concept is fairly progressive, and you don't see this application in the grid a lot because it definitely is technically challenging to pull off. So now we're going to go into some design techniques. So these are basically responsive and adaptive techniques as you're designing for multiple screen sizes that you can apply. And these are definitely a small subset. There's many, many, many more beyond what I'm going to go through. But these are just some basics. So first, I just wanted to reinforce this idea of touch, and specifically how touch forces us to think about where we place elements on the screen. So a lot of touch is driven by the placement of your fingers, obviously. So, and thumb being the most common finger people use for phones. So your thumbs are typically at the bottom of the screen. So you could imagine if you have a primary call to action like a button, you probably would want to put those near the thumbs where the thumbs can easily access. As you move towards the edges of the screen or the top of the screen, that's where the person has to actually move their hands and maybe even use their index finger or another finger to access it. So when you're designing stuff, a great example of this is on Google Material Design, they have what they call the fab button, or the floating action button. It's usually just a plus symbol wrapped in a circle, and it's usually always placed around the bottom of the screen, around where it's easily accessible by the thumbs. This is actually true of tablets as well. So again, you want to think about where people typically hold a tablet, and where a thumb can easily access the part of the screen would be where you'd want to put primary navigation, primary buttons, things of that nature. Another concept is called reflow. So we talked about this earlier with the reordering, and just something to consider when you're designing. But reflow is a combination of reordering or repositioning, and then also resizing. So it's definitely the most common when you see a website that's responsive. So typically you'll have all the container boxes shrink horizontally and then stack vertically, and you might even have some of them get removed on smaller devices. It's the most commonly used technique for responsive design. This is another one, which is what we're calling column drop. But if you have more of a horizontal layout where you're using horizontal columns, column drop's very similar to reflow, but effectively what you're doing is you're removing or eliminating these horizontal columns as you have less screen real estate. So as you move down in breakpoints, you're effectively taking horizontal columns and you're moving them to vertical columns of containers. Off canvas, this one's one of my favorites because it's a mobile first technique that really has transcended mobile, and I see on a lot of different experiences now. And it's also one that sort of defies traditional usability principles. But in a modern digital age, it's a great example of why usability principles need to be constantly examined, given what our new devices afford us the capability to do. So off canvas is essentially, it's usually a horizontal layout of containers, and it's the idea that you can hint a container that's slightly off the screen. If you show just a sliver of it, or if you show, maybe even you can use animation to reinforce this, but it's the concept that the actual screen, the canvas of the screen is beyond. So you see this a lot with, funny, Tinder is the app that comes to mind when you swipe left and right, and you might see an element off the screen, but you can sort of endlessly horizontally swipe left or right because you're always seeing a sliver of the content on the edges of the screen. And I see this a lot in desktop web design now too. Another element, this is kind of, we talked about this with reflow, but you can play around with position. So this would be what I would describe as an adaptive change of, you can take, let's say on the desktop web version, if I have a navigation or a menu show up on the top right, because on a mobile device, you want to put the position of that near the thumbs like we talked about, you can reposition that towards the bottom. And then also because on a mobile device, depending upon your use case, where it might be hard to actually maintain the position of that menu item, what you could do is you could have that menu item be flush and be anchored, be flush left and right, and also be anchored or sticky to the bottom of the screen. So you can play around with position elements. You can also see when you have more horizontal room on the menu, maybe you add some icons to sort of reinforce the affordances there. This is another kind of related item of, this is also another adaptive technique, which we're calling transform. But effectively here, on a phone with your limited screen real estate, you might want to vertically stack pieces of content. You might also want to present, let's say if there's a visual graphic with the content, you might want to present it in a much smaller or different format. Whereas when you have a larger screen, you can completely represent what would be a list as a gallery view. On the right, you have a lot more screen to show the visual or the graphic, and then you might even be able to add a menu item to each object, which you don't actually have here. So transform is really kind of uber adaptive of no rules really apply. You can completely represent something differently given different screen size breakpoints.
Hey, Joe, if I can interrupt before you continue on.
Yeah, absolutely.
A little feedback here, my voice. So it's just a time check per se. So we have officially 15 more minutes. I know your presentation does run pretty tight to the end. Yeah. We don't have any hard stop. Like the recording or meeting won't shut down. Do you have a hard stop?
I don't. I'm almost done though. I think I'll be done before 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Because I just want to make sure we have some time for Q&A afterwards. So those of you, we will still do some Q&A when Joe finishes. Continue on. Yeah. I'll go back from you.
Absolutely. So that's transform. Again, this is kind of like uber adaptive techniques. Another concept here, and this is not specific to mobile devices, but I think it was inspired given the constrained screen real estate, is adding a perceived third dimension to screens using just visual graphics. So the whole idea here is that by using shadows and by using light in interesting ways, you can emulate a physical object or physical material on a two-dimensional digital screen. So the idea here is that you can actually bring things more to the forefront or more to the background just by using the way it's visually presented in terms of shadows and light differently. And Google Material really goes in depth in terms of explaining this concept here, and you've seen it really transcended from Google out towards, I'd say most companies make use of this technique. I'm going to go into the team, one of the teams that I manage, which is the Harmony Design team. now we're actually QuickBooks design team. We do have a design system site. It's got quite a bit of responsive UI components on it. We have a responsive UI component library called Harmony UI on GitHub. So if you guys are ever building, especially a mobile web app, although we are doing experiments now where in QuickBooks Mobile, in our native app, we're actually using some of the web UI components that we wrote in a native experience. So that's pretty interesting. We're really happy about that. So feel free to check that out. We also have design.quickbooks.com, where we're combining a lot of what existed on Harmony, along with a lot of the QuickBooks brand elements there. So if you forgot about all of that, which I often do in these types of presentations, this is actually David's advice, which great advice, which is to just come away with 3 takeaways, things to remember, things you can apply, given all of that information. So I think the most important thing that we talked about is that content actually is the thing you really need to think about as a key part of your design. So the text you put on the page, and even in some cases, some of the graphics, because you have less screen real estate on a mobile device, the text really needs to help you through the process. It needs to be simple and succinct, and it can really make or break an experience. I'm in design reviews all the time where we'll review customer analytics, or we'll review A/B testing, and you would be surprised how much just very slight changes in the way things are written can have drastic impacts on customer experience performance. So I think we always think about copy and text sort of as an afterthought. We'll mock it up, we'll build a prototype, and it's got lorem ipsum or stuff in it. But it's really, really important to the person that's using it on the other end. Similar to that is just decluttering and focusing what you're doing. So if you're trying to convert a desktop experience to a mobile one, whip out that red pen and start slashing in terms of everything from navigation to content presented on the screen, to calls to action, to input forms like we talked about. You really need to think about simplifying what's on there. And mobile, designing for mobile has really been a great forcing function for designers and developers to really declutter. And then the last one is just taking advantage of the device capabilities. So, at the hackathon we had in SBG a couple weeks, I was amazed at the wealth of ideas, a lot of which took advantage of device capabilities, such as conversational UI, such as making use of the camera and GPS in new and interesting ways. One great example we have in QuickBooks Self-Employed, if you download the mobile app, is the expense tracker feature. So you literally turn it on, and using GPS, we automatically track your mileage. You literally don't do a thing, and we automatically track an expense and account for your mileage with literally the flip of one on-off switch. So thinking about how you can make use of all the amazing sensors and processors and even screen that's on the device really makes for an amazing experience. So with that, I think those are my 3 takeaways, and let's open it up for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Again, everybody, if you have any questions about designing for mobile, maybe even some specifics about decisions we made. I know, Joe, maybe 100 slides ago, you had one where it compared our experience of 4 different mobile apps and how it looked and tasted the same, but you even pointed out that, one of them wasn't exactly the same. I remember seeing a slide like that from about 4 years ago at Intuit, and it was not even ballpark close. You would think it was 4 different companies building things. So even ourselves, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go when it comes to mobile.
Exactly.
So yes, any of you, Jonathan, Old Sport, Scott, David, and Corey, if you guys have any questions in regards to some of your own mobile development you're doing or comments, please let us know, and Joe can attack those. He's a really, really good resource, maybe one of the best at Intuit when it comes to this. Check the chat too, the thing in chat. Nobody has any questions? Oh,
yeah.
Good.
I was gonna say, if you guys ever have questions, I'm on Slack. It's great. We have a sort of global Slack now for Intuit. Joe Preston. My email, Joe_Preston at Intuit.com. So yeah, if you guys don't want to ask some questions,
Twitter too, right?
Twitter, yeah. So at Pezzarelli, Peezarelli. And yeah, bunch of ways to get a hold of me.
Could you talk a little bit about what happened with Harmony, and how it's changing and some of the some of the resources that you're providing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Harmony, when it started, it was a design system for designers, and it was also really a product-centric design system, and we still use it all the time. About a year and a half ago, we started to begin building a UI component library that was based on a lot of the design patterns in Harmony. Architecturally, initially, the UI components were written basically as web components or JavaScript components, and then they were being wrapped in React with a React wrapper. A decision was made 6 to 9 months ago now to actually move forward with just writing the components in pure React because of all the performance and the testability and the scalability that afforded us. So we now have some really nice, just pure React components. They're all responsive. And a lot of those are actually being elevated now to being used at an Intuit wide level. So there's a group across the business units, Mint, TurboTax, ProConnect, and SBG. And we're all working on combining design systems, combining UI components. And so I'm really looking forward to the outcome of that, because as you know, we're beginning to share our customer experiences across our products. So this is really the driver for beginning to think about how can we start to combine Harmony with what, let's say, TurboTax had their own design system, and same with UI components. So that's where we're headed. You'll see a lot more coming up on that. For SBG specifically too, we wanted to incorporate brand and marketing and product so that from a customer experience standpoint, our customers, it's all part of their experience. So we wanted to really give people standards around brand and marketing. Sorry, I've got a landscaper starting in my backyard. Did that answer your question?
Oh yeah, it did. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
That's a good question, Josh. I was actually thinking that myself because obviously I know Harmony's out there. I know a couple of developers who really built an app from scratch in the last 8 months to 14 months built using Harmony. And then I noticed QuickBooks Online looks and tastes a little bit different than it did 4 months ago. Yeah. And so it's really like without us having those really good design patterns available, so they can quickly, just as fast as we scan QBO, can developers do that to their app? Because I think a lot of those developers that have really embraced the Harmony UI, it's because they really believe their app should look, smell, taste like QuickBooks. So it's
Right.
It's an interesting.
It's interesting.
Hey, Joe, move your monitor back one. Can you tilt your monitor? All we see is your mouth and beard.
Oh, sorry. How about that?
Oh,
that's better.
Sorry about that.
It's usually people that don't have hair that hide the top of their heads.
Yeah, right.
It's interesting when I log into QBO, the experience is different quite often. The layout of the menus on the left is different, and it seems like it's random.
Yeah,
like where the chart of accounts is, for example, that's an obvious one that moves different places. Yeah.
So there's a team called Right For Me Navigation on QBO, and what they're trying to figure out, and this probably will be a long journey, but we actually want to get to a place where the navigation and maybe the experience is personalized towards what we know about you as a business. So, as we get better data on our customers, we should be able to completely tailor the experience, including the navigation, to what they need. So I think what you're seeing on QBO is you're seeing a lot of sort of evolutions and testing, to your example of moving towards that direction. And they haven't gotten it right, and I don't know when we will, but I think what we're envisioning as the vision of that is really a personalized navigation to what you need. We're also thinking about QBO in terms of a different mindset about you may not discover you needed accounting as a business until you're farther along as a more complex business. Maybe what you first discover is you need to invoice and get paid. And then later down the line, you discover you need to do accounting, you need chart of accounts, you need to do reconciliation, expenses, all the other stuff that, maybe a more sophisticated business needs. So we're beginning to do experiments where even thinking about the construct of, do we always lead with accounting as our core sort of set of features? Or are there other parts of what we offer that are more how a business actually starts, and then over time we can introduce those other accounting features to them? So I think you'll see a lot of stuff coming out on QBO. QBSE is actually way ahead of us in terms of thinking along those mindsets. So, yeah.
It's interesting, Joe, just riffing on that a little bit. I tend to take a lot of every different app I have, I tend to start setting preferences the same way. Mm-hmm. Right? It'd be interesting if apps across the board started sharing some sort of preferences. I think Xbox kind of tried to do that with the Xbox 360 at one time. You could actually say, like, when I play a race car game, I want the settings this way. And when I play a shooter game, make the trigger be on the left trigger instead of the right trigger. And in theory, the games were supposed to use those and pull those in. But that's kind of, it's interesting because, who wants to set up every time I get another app or sign up for something else? I got to configure all my preferences again, especially when it comes to notifications, that type of stuff.
Right. And we have enough data on the users, or at least we should, to know what they use and know how they like to use it. And I think if I read through our user voice feedback, I don't know if any of you guys do, but it's literally the customers. A lot of it includes curse words, but some of the takeaways, you see a lot of stuff around personalization. I want to customize my navigation. I don't need to see these sections. I don't want to see this type of stuff on my dashboard. There's thousands and thousands of customer feedback along those lines. So I think that's definitely an area that we're headed.
Yeah, and I imagine it's hard, Joe, is like as you evolve your UI, not just for mobile, but across the board, when you start moving things around, people like where it was. I remember with QuickBooks Desktop, the icon bar in QuickBooks Desktop was there for 9 straight years. And then the one year we moved it, we had to drop everything and then re-put it back in and then reship a new version of QuickBooks, which in those days was like patches and floppy diskettes and CDs. But people lost their minds because we moved that bar. So we took it away because we thought we had a better bar on the left. So.
That's right. Yeah, people don't like change.
At least with SaaS, you can put it back pretty quickly if you would.
Right, exactly. Sorry, I'm going to go on mute here. But if I don't know if there are any more questions, but I know we're running a little over, but I have time.
Yeah, I don't know. Looks like somebody named Jim missed the presentation, but it looks like they popped in. I don't know offhand who that is, but Jim, if you have any questions regarding mobile development, definitely throw that out there.
One of the most interesting things that we've been playing around with that I briefly talked about is QuickBooks has developed a mobile shell. So that's essentially allows us to embed web experiences within native experiences and have access to all of the sensors and all of the native UI controls from a web experience. So what this allows us to do is essentially literally write a plugin once and deploy that same plugin or feature on our web app and our native mobile apps. And it also affords us the flexibility to tailor the native mobile experience to use actual mobile UI controls. So for example, you could have a feature with an input form, and they're actually all web input forms. And on desktop web, you know, let's say you have a date element, you click on it, and we give you a little date picker window. You could have that same exact plugin and feature show up on QuickBooks mobile app, and you click the date form, and it triggers, let's say, the iOS or the Android date picker. So we're really excited about that in terms of the amount of development time that will save us. And it also, in terms of the flexibility to still preserve what we really love about the mobile experience, but not having to code things 3 different ways. So right now, you know, we're doing a lot of just duplicate effort of coding the same feature on iOS and Android that we have on web. So.
Hey, Joe, what are your thoughts? Okay.
Are you going to share that technology, like on the Harmony concept?
It's not actually part of Harmony, but if you go into like Intuit Wiki and you search for SPG mobile shell, you'll see quite a bit of information on it. Let me actually see.
Yeah, if you could put if that's external, Joe, if you could put a link to that in the chat, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, let me find that.
Okay. And while you're poking around on that, Joe, I saw a presentation from James Whitaker. He's a Microsoft fellow distinguished engineer, long title, right? He's been at Microsoft for a long time. He gave a presentation at Hack Arizona, and he kind of talked about the next 10 years, right? And one of the things he kind of proposed that question is like, is the UI going away, right? Like most of the battery juice gets used on your phone is by your screen, right? Or any of these devices now, to where it's either going to be voice or maybe it's just sensors detecting things and then adjusting things without you actually interacting with the UI at all, right? It'll just be like, oh, your blood pressure went up. Or he gave this analogy of, you know, there's that app that you can get if you're in a movie theater, and it'll tell you when to take a bathroom break, because that's going to be like the 5 minutes of a movie that you're not going to miss anything if you get up to go to the bathroom. And he's like, in the future, it'll just buzz you on the arm when you should go based on the last time you went to the bathroom, based on your Fitbit data. Like you won't even touch or have to even look at a screen in the future. So I was kind of wondering, with you obviously being a UI guy, where you think these alternative ways of interactions are taking things.
Yeah, that's a topic I'm really passionate. In fact, I'm part of a group at Intuit called the Design Futures Group, and we're always actually looking at that stuff. I honestly, you know, at our hackathon, we had tons of conversational UI, tons of voice entries. So I think there's no doubt that the graphical user interface, if it's not going away, it's certainly going to be heavily augmented by all these other forms of interaction that we're already seeing. I honestly think that I don't know if you've seen the movie Her that came out a while ago, but it definitely
it's in Q, yeah.
Yeah. It's a great example, I think, of a very realistic future in which you know, you do some things on a graphical interface, but then you do a lot of things through voice and even gesture through movement. And I really see that as probably a possibility. Sorry, I keep moving rooms in my house to get away from the landscaper. But there's one thing I could say about that is, if there's actually there's a great video I could dig up where it shows if you start to combine interfaces, you combine voice with gesture with graphics, you can get really high fidelity of information presented back to the computer. So an example would be if I have a feature in my house where I turn on my lights with my voice, one way I could turn on the lights in my living room is I could say, turn on light living room, south facing or something. But when you start to combine gesture, like let's say I just point at the light and I say light on. Or let's say there's all sorts of really interesting possibilities when you start to combine these things in terms of just the amount of information you're presenting in the form of an interaction. So I think we're going to just see combination of interfaces. I don't see the GUI going away. I just see it being heavily augmented by all these other forms and maybe overtaken at some point. But I think as humans, we're very visual people too. A picture speaks 1,000 words, and so I think that graphical user interface can have a long lifespan.
The video they showed at the conference, they called it QB, not instead of Alexa, it was called QB.
Yeah, right.
Is how real is that?
It's very real. I just saw at a hackathon 2 weeks ago. The payroll team, QuickBooks Payroll, literally ran almost every function of payroll from talking to a Google Home device, and it worked. Editing the amount you're going to pay an employee, running your payroll. It would explain that you're going to be short on payroll. It was a very, very complex set of interactions that they literally coded in a couple weeks and had demoed and showed it working. So I don't think what you saw, some of the stuff, I think what you saw in that video is a little far-fetched. But I think we'll be there in the next 5 to 10 years. We'll probably have more than that.
Yeah, I recently upgraded the firmware on my car so I can use Android Auto, and it's actually really great. But there's just plenty of times where I'm just like, oh, forget it, and I unplug it, and then I just go to my normal phone's UI to do something, then plug it back in to get it. Just sometimes it's just a little bit of it's not there yet, right? But you can see the potential, and I think that's a really good version of it's my phone, but the UI is really in a whole different place, even though it's my device doing it all.
Yeah. I think what will be interesting about sorry, I'm still trying to pull up that wiki. What will be interesting about voice UI is that we're having to relearn stuff that we already know as humans and how to sort of fake it in a digital format. So you could think about emotion and tone and the pace at which someone speaks, and how do you use those as techniques in UI will be really, really interesting. Being able to discern if something's truthful or not just by how they're talking about stuff. So I think we're headed to a really, really interesting place as far as that whole package they called natural UI, which is just UI that kind of emulates what we do being human.
Cool. All right, if we don't have any other questions, we'll stop the Hangout. For those of you who just remember, come next week, we have 2 more Hangouts. We have one, it's going to be 5 a.m. Pacific time. So we'll also have week. And then we're also doing the other Hangout, which is going to be using webhooks. So Vishal will be joining us for really the 3rd time to talk about webhooks. Webhooks has evolved from a preview on the Hangout to when we launched webhooks on the Hangout. And so now this is really that tight presentation with code samples, etc., from QBconnect. So hopefully I'll see everybody next week, and watch for this on YouTube, and see you around. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.